I thought of the scene where Mac is just getting introduced to the Holy Spirit, to Jesus, and to God. And so he goes, so which one of you is, and they all, simultaneously in sync say, I am. And we just watched that scene. And I love that. But and when I was watching that, it caught my attention because I see in that moment when it's three different persons standing in front of you, it just for some reason made more sense to me because I saw the ownership, I saw the authority in each of their voices, but at the same time I saw like a unity on display. So all of these things are, going through my mind, and I thought to myself, how is it that Jesus can be God? Because we know that Jesus is God. The Word tells us that Jesus is God, and that these all yet separate are each one. How is it that Jesus can be God, yet also God forsake his Son? And, that's funny to ask because in any other context, that question makes no sense at all because, I feel like the Trinity is the only thing that you can get that hung up on because it's like we can't comprehend it. But then I began to research this phrase, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And I was astounded at what I found. So I want to share that with you here tonight. And this is going to be, I'll try to keep it short and sweet because I know I'm getting late, started late because of our film. But let's look at it together. You got those verses now? Let's look at that first one. Let's look at Matthew 27, verse 46. And this is Jesus on the cross and him actually saying it. So here it is. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice. The 9th hour, about 3 p.m. our time. So about 3 p.m., Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? You see, there's an important context here that I was never aware of prior to my research today. And it kind of put this whole movie and this whole story and this whole conversation between Mac and God into perspective. You see, the crowd that would have been there at Golgotha when Jesus was being crucified, they would have recognized this phrase, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. They would have recognized that immediately. And the reason they would have recognized that, and like I said, I was not aware of this, but Jesus is quoting verbatim a messianic psalm. So King David is the one who authored this psalm in Psalms 22. And look with me at the first verse in Psalm 22. This is incredible. And I hope this opens up your eyes to what Jesus was saying on the cross. 22:1, this is what it says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Verbatim, Jesus is saying the very same words that Psalms 22:1 says. And I know what you're thinking because I was initially thinking this too, and I dug into my research. I was like, well, that's an odd coincidence. But when you continue reading, I hope that changes your mind. Because I was a skeptic. I was like, that's just a coincidence. He said that one phrase. But let's continue to look at Psalms 29. So let's go to verse 7 and 8 in Psalms 22. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. So with that, let's go back to Matthew 27 and let's look at verse 43. The soldiers would have been saying this. He trusts in the Lord, he trusts in God, let God deliver him now. If he desires him, for he said, I am the Son of God. Now keep in mind, this was prophesied 1,000 years before the crucifixion. King David would have authored this, would have put pen to paper 1,000 years before the crucifixion. So the very things that are happening at Golgotha, at the crucifixion are verbatim what Psalms 22 says. Let's continue. Psalms 22, verse 16. Dogs surround me. Dogs, the Jews called Gentiles, the outsiders, they called them dogs. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircle me. They pierce my hands and my feet. Let's keep going. Mark 15:24. This is at the crucifixion. They nailed his hands and feet to the cross. No. This one is interesting. Listen to this. Someone might have asked David 1,000 years earlier, hey, David, what do you mean they pierced my hands and feet? To which he would have responded, I got to be honest with you, I don't know. I'm just writing what God told me to write. And you know why David would have said that? Because crucifixion was not invented yet. Crucifixion was not even a thing. So God was telling him to put pen to paper about what was going to happen at the crucifixion. This is incredible to me. It hasn't even been invented yet. Now let's continue. Psalms 22:18, and it says this, they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Matthew 27:35, back to the crucifixion. And when they crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. I just want you to take a moment, because this is crazy to me. I have to go to the scene. I have to quit with my own context of, being an American growing up and only hearing what I've heard. I have to go back, and I have to put myself in the shoes of the Jews, of the followers, of the believers who would have been standing there watching Jesus get beat and get brutally mocked and just annihilated on this hill. And I have to put myself in their shoes. Imagine the impact of being in this crowd and watching this play out before your very own eyes. Like hearing, it would be like, I just want you to understand, it would be like hearing the beginning of a catchy song. It's like I say at the beginning of a song, and then like, you ever had that moment where you hear the beginning of a song and then it cuts out, or somebody just sings the beginning, but then you know the rest of the tune. It's such a catchy song, you just saw the song play out in your head in its entirety. You know what I'm talking about? It's whatever the song may be. Like you just get the rhythm, you remember it, and you can see it play out in its entirety. That's what it would have been like to this crowd who heard Jesus quote the first verse of Psalm 22. They recognized, they would have known, this would have been something they had memorized, Psalm 22. So when Jesus says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? They're in that moment recognizing Psalm 22. They're beckoning back to Psalm 22, something that would have been a part of their upbringing, something that they would have been taught from a very young age, something that they would have memorized growing up. And they're sitting there, and they're in that moment, and they're starting to put the pieces together. Wait, they just said what Psalm 22 says they would say. Like they're seeing this whole thing play out. Like Psalm 22 says that if he's really God, God will get him down off that cross. And they're hurling those insults right there. And Jesus just said the words of Psalm 22. They're like, wait, they just said what it said they would say. And then wait, they're doing exactly what it said they would do. They're piercing his hands and his feet. Like crucifixion wasn't even a thing. And they're casting lots for his clothing. Oh my goodness. Guys, are we picking up on this? Exactly what was told would happen is happening in this moment. And all of the sudden, in the midst of the most tragic situation in all of history, there would have been a glimmer of hope as the believers and the followers looking on begin to realize that what is happening is exactly what it said would happen in Psalms 22. And they would have begun to see this moment, and with such despair, thinking to themselves, all hope is lost. They would begin to find a glimmer of hope as it builds within them. Oh, he's doing it. He's fulfilling his promise. Wow, guys, we're watching the Messiah die before our he is who he says he is. But as if that wasn't enough proof already, I want you to notice the final words that Jesus says on the cross. And we've all heard it before. We all know it all too well. John 19:30. This is Jesus. So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." Bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. No. Catch this. As if it wasn't enough proof already, I want you to catch the very last words in Psalm 22. You ready? Everybody's excited? Yes, we're ready? I'm ready. Psalm 22:31. Let's look at it. His generation yet to be born will glorify him, and they will all declare, "It is finished." Jesus is too cool. Drop the mic, Jesus. And it's as if my entire outlook changed. And maybe this is you tonight. Maybe whatever it is that tragic loss that you've suffered, maybe you feel like Mac. I know what happened. You betrayed him too. You abandoned him too. You abandoned me too in my darkest hour. Why didn't you come through? I was praying to you, God. And I began to realize the point of Matthew 27:46, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, was not to get hung up on God forsaking Jesus. That was never the point. Just as the movie says, you misunderstand the mystery. Don't ever think that what my son chose to do didn't cost us both dearly. And now catch this. Love always leaves a mark. We were there together. We were there together. Love always leaves a mark. You see, the point that Jesus was making, the point of Matthew 27:46, Jesus is not necessarily saying, "God, you've forsaken me." He's using, I want you to see it. I want you to see the Jews standing there. I want you to see them in their despair and remember that God's still God. It's in Matthew 26. It's coming to me right now. I don't even remember the verse, but I know that when the guards came for Jesus to take him away, and Peter reacted in the way that he did with the sword, and he cuts the soldier's ear off, and in that moment, Jesus is like, no, don't worry, guys. Like, this is going to be okay. Don't you think that God couldn't send down 12 legions of angels right here in this very moment? That's what I want you to recognize. We get caught up. We're like, oh, Jesus is even crying out. It's a bad day. God's going down today. And we're even thinking he's lost all hope. But I want you to realize that Jesus was still God. He was not lost all hope. He was not in the despair that we think he was. He recognized us in his pain. He recognizes you in your pain, in your tragedy. And in that moment, with his very last breaths, he was bringing hope to his people. In the very worst of his sorrow and his despair, he chose to love you. You see, love always leaves a mark. In the moments that Jesus was saying, "God, you've forsaken me," he was actually, you know what he was actually doing? He was reminding us, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." That's what he was doing, church. He was doing the very thing that they needed most. They needed hope more than anything in that moment. They needed something to remind them of His promises to them, of His love for them, that all hope was not lost. And you know what He did? He started singing the song that they would remember. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then he goes from the beginning, he says the first words, and then he says, verse 31, the last words, he says, it is finished. So they can walk off that hill with their head held high. They can be reminded that in 3 days he's going to get back up with the keys to hell and the grave, and that he's defeated sin, death, shame, guilt, everything that we had to deal with. Our shame and despair would not last forever. We have hope. We have love. Love leaves a mark. I'm telling you, man, you're going to want to keep coming back. This movie gets me fired up. But I just came to encourage you with that tonight. Jesus is God. Never, not for a moment, were we forsaken.